Hello, folks. Another episode of Burning Platform. This time I have two friends, repeat guests, Brian Sommer from Techventive and John Reed from Diginomica. And, it's approaching the end of hurricane season and end of event season. So I thought it'd be nice to get them both to talk about their year in events. God, Brian was telling me he's been to about 30 different events. John, you probably haven't beat. I've done fewer, but it's been an interesting year. So let's bring out what we've learned from events. And we're going to spend about 10 minutes each, present a few slides each. John first, Brian next, me last. And you should hear from us, our experiences, both in physical world and in virtual world. Hopefully it'll give you some ideas on how to carry forward next year. Hopefully we want to go completely to in-person again, get a nice blend going. So without further ado, John, do you want to kick it off?
Sure, glad to. A couple of quick things. I'm going to talk a little bit today, really from the vantage point of what I think customers are looking for from events. Most of the on-the-ground events that I go to, I have been to some analyst events this year, but mostly it's been customer and user events. And I really want to speak from that perspective to the degree that I can, because I've got a lot of feedback from attendees on the ground. There's probably a separate conversation about what analysts and media types like us like in events, but I think we're a different crowd and we're usually not the main audience. Most of the events I attended this year were our partner events at Diginomica, so I'm not trying to turn a promotional event to our partners, but that's where I ended up. So just disclosure, nothing personal to the events I did not attend, but as you all realize, one of the changes is we're not on the road quite as much as we used to be. Maybe we will be someday. I'm not sure if that's good or bad. Anyhow, I prepared a little bit of a slide deck because one of the things I write about a lot on Diginomica is about the move towards hybrid events. And frankly, I'm frustrated around this topic to a large extent because I felt before the pandemic that on the ground events were largely what I would call legacy and not creative enough. And I felt the same as we went into virtual events, that most virtual events were really passive viewer experiences that really weren't very engaging and very good. I have, however, seen a little bit of progress. So I'm going to balance my grouchiness with some credit where credit is due, because it's really important to acknowledge the steps that are happening. And what I'm hoping is that vendors will continue to expand the art of the possible, both in terms of what's on the ground and virtual, because ultimately the goal here, I think, is to stay a little more connected throughout the year and to provide a level of flexibility that sometimes that happens in person, sometimes that happens online. But I really think it's important to move away from this idea that we're all going to hop on planes once a year and have this big show and then a lot of momentum and then everything falls away and then we see each other in a year. I don't think that's...
That's a great point. And I'll reinforce it and I present my point.
Great.
Yeah.
So anyway, I can't cover all my views on events in this segment because we've been challenged by Vinnie to be concise. 10 minutes.
I'm going to try to do that. 5 minutes already.
And I've already used 5. So I have to be very efficient here with the rest of it. And I'm going to kind of give you my view on where we are with hybrid events, because like I said, I saw a big improvement in the fall. Some of my slides are a little bit mundane because part of offering a good hybrid event is some specifics of how you engage people online. So with that, I'm going to share my slides.
And mundane because you're using PowerPoint. Blame it on Microsoft.
Well, mundane because I'm using PowerPoint, and I'm using an older version of PowerPoint at that. And now I'm going to go into presentation mode, if I can do this properly here. Slideshow. Okay. And so slouching towards true hybrid events. Yes, it's we're getting there. Anyhow, so here's one.
You're really going to fire up the audience, Brian. You'll have to make up for John.
Yeah. So slouching was a little bit of a cynical take there, but in fact, so at Sage Transform here, what we have here, and we saw a lot more of this year, is when you were in the session catalog, you could see where you were going to be able to view these events. Were you going to be able to see them after? Were you going to be able to stream them? And by the way, this got to be important at certain points, because if you were trying to get into a room and the room was full, vendors figured out, hey, we can actually live stream some of those events if there's not enough room for all the attendees, which is a really creative use of hybrid. So we started to see a little more effectiveness around the session layout. You can see in the Oracle example here where in person, live stream, on demand. So starting to give people a much clearer picture of how they can consume this content. And a lot of this is understanding that event audiences aren't all the same. They have different agendas and different needs. And hybrid gives us an example of how we can serve those needs. I call it radical inclusion, but you don't have to get too radical about it to include people. This is just an advancement. And what it is vendors are learning how to become media companies to some extent. And they're making progress. And that includes things like having show hosts and stuff like that. So
John,
yeah.
One complaint of mine is I like to only include small segments from different sessions. That's
Right.
been very difficult to get from vendors. They seem once an event ends, I guess they're so tired, that goes into the back burner. Try to get replays, MP4s,
Yeah.
pulling teeth.
You make a really good point, and that's actually what this slide is about, Vinnie. So you nailed it. Like Oracle was an example of one of the few vendors I saw where they really seem to haven't gone in and checked too much, but for the most part, what I could tell, they packaged up all the stuff that they filmed and they made it available not just for attendees but for everyone. I've seen a lot of vendors who after the event you can't find all the content that was recorded. It doesn't make any sense, and it's not being offered to the global audience that would want to consume it. And a big part of this is vendors need to start understanding that's a really valuable audience from a customer engagement perspective, but also for a lead gen perspective. There are people who want to consume that content after the event for a variety of reasons. So didn't see too many good examples of that yet, but vendors are starting to realize that content after an event is valuable to attendees. So
John, to that point, a few years ago, SAP told me, they said Sapphire used to be a Orlando-centric event. They had become very good at spreading the videos
right
across the world for months, right? So they said, we really learned to stretch it out.
Yep.
This Sapphire, they forgot that. I mean, after 3 years, I guess they forgot that a little bit because I went to do several breakouts and they forgot to video those. It's like, guys, I could have taken notes if you told me. So, so different vendors, partly I think there is because it was a 3-year break, they're just coming back to gathering all the notes that worked that didn't work from 3 years ago.
Well, and there's a deeper problem, Vinnie, which is to get higher on my hybrid event scale, vendors are going to have to engage creative event talent that doesn't currently exist on their event teams. And we all have to, in the enterprise world, be humble about that we're not good at everything. And event organizers at vendors are very, very good at executing large scale events, which is no small thing. Events are very difficult, but creative event design is a different skill and it's not in-house on most teams. The good news is there's a lot of people out there in the wild who can do it. So you got to engage them. Here's something vendors are getting better at, though, which is the in-house TV studio. This was a Salesforce example during the pandemic of largely a virtual setup. But the point being that once you get better at an internal TV studio, it gives you a lot more hybrid options because now you can kind of moderate things. So instead of me logging in and you logging in, Vinnie and Brian, and trying to figure out, is the keynote actually streaming today? Am I on the right stream? Is it happening? What's going on? Is it live? Is it not? Is it working? Instead, you have a studio host who's engaging with you and you can tell, hey, it's live, but we haven't kicked it over to the keynote yet because obviously the keynote sometimes doesn't start on time. So the studio gives you an option to kind of create a moderated experience for viewers, and vendors are making a little bit of progress on this. Then analysts getting in on the action. In this case, this is CRM players. This is Brent Leary, half of the cohort there. This was some banter they were doing during and after the keynotes. I was like in the hot seat for that one. But the point being, streaming parties are very cool, and vendors need to let go a little bit. Sometimes you chat over their keynotes. It's okay. The keynote's available on replay. What you really want is a dynamic sense of community around what's happening. And then this was a really interesting example from Planful, and this was actually more of an analyst track type experience, but I highlighted it because I thought it was a neat way of including folks This was a planful executive session. You can't see everyone in the room, but it was about 15 people, including analysts and executives. But there were also a few people who couldn't make it. A couple of them had COVID. One of them had a family conflict. They were on the screen there, and so they were asking questions and participating in the event. Now, was this perfect? No. Someday will they be holograms? Maybe. but the point is that while it wasn't perfect, I think to a person, everyone in that room would say it was better to have a little awkwardness with their involvement than to exclude them. And I think that's one of the important lessons here as far as moving forward with hybrid. And so my overall hybrid event grade for 22 for vendors is a C-. That may look bad, but actually it was an F until the fall. So I think that's pretty good cramming for vendors to get so much higher. And to Vinnie's point, they could get up to C+, I think, pretty effectively by simply just packaging the content that's already being used more effectively after the events, which would be a major step forward. To get into the A and B range, there would need to be more online interactive components to engage VIP customers and influencers and stuff like that. This is not outside the reach of vendors, but it takes a little more work and planning to create an interactive component for VIPs. So that's
John,
it for now.
John, I've already seen a comment here. Somebody wants to know, is there any chance you'll grade on the curve this year?
Yeah, the curve could happen. When it comes award time, I won't have to mention like that everyone that gets an award was actually C-. So yes, I benefited from the curve in high school. It would be hypocritical of me not to give vendors that same opportunity.
This is like a magic quadrant. Everybody is in the bottom left, and they take out a microscope and say, I was number one because I was so close to being the other quadrants.
I want to applaud the progress because I did see progress.
John, thank you so much. Brian, do you want to take the slouch?
Yeah, and I just, while I'm sharing my screen, I just wanted to say I'd love to give some participation trophies out to some of the vendors, but anyway, so I'm going to take a more lighthearted view, just to kind of break up things a little bit. This is kind of my view, mostly on pictures. What I wanted to start off with is, I think for everyone watching this, you need to remember who these events really are all of, who they're designed for. And first and foremost, you go to one, you realize right away, and I was at one yesterday, it's all about, it's predominantly about the customer, but there are a bunch of other constituents that are going to be there as well. And every one of them has their own kind of wants and needs of what they want to get out of it. I mean, I'm not going to drain all this kind of stuff. Obviously, what partners want is one thing, and that's leads. That's it. That, I don't care what kind of partner you are. Customers are there kicking tires and figuring out, do they stay with the vendor? Do they pick up other stuff? You've got prospects, and I've got a piece that I wrote last night on the plane back from Ceridian's event, because I saw 450 prospects in one room alone at that show. That just blows me away. For that many people as a percentage of the total attendees, you almost never see that. Investors are another group, and then eventually you get to some of the industry, pundits and analysts and all that John and Vinnie play in, and they all have their different things. One individual that we all know, he was roaming the halls selling sponsorships and advertising and other kind of stuff, which is kind of tacky in my opinion, but we're all there supposedly to learn from what customers and vendors are out to pitch. So let me tell you about travel to these events. So I'm flying on a Southwest plane the other day, and Captain Sweatpants is across the aisle from me, and he decides in the middle of this long flight that he wants to take his suitcase down out of the overhead bin and repack it. And you can obviously see where I'm showing you, there's my laptop. This guy parked his butt over my seat for so long, I had time to actually dig out my phone out of one of my pockets, hold my laptop and my drink, and take a picture of them. And this is what flying is like when you go to these events. This is what they give an analyst for a hotel room in Vegas. This is my window view. And, this is what I got to wake up to, that beautiful dirty window looking out over the
Well,
roof of
it was a
Expo.
suite. It was a 4-bedroom suite, right?
No, that was that's one of those hotels where they tell you when you show up, at check-in time, well, Brian, we just really don't have any rooms ready. I'm like, tell me something I haven't heard before in Vegas. Anyway, and then Vinnie's favorite airline, Southwest. You can see how much love I get from Southwest when you get a boarding group of C-76. I mean, do the math, folks. The plane only holds about 145 people, and how did boarding groups A, B get on there, and then they still need 76 more people to fill in the bit there.
Can I ask a question about that?
Brian, they're trying to tell you something, but you won't listen.
Why didn't they just put last on there?
Well, what I want you to really focus on is, look, this was an early bird, boarding thing. I paid extra for that, so, if you ever, and this is a message for the attendees, you ever run on a plane after one of these shows and you actually see me sitting on some airline, maybe in a first class seat or premium economy, you should come up and congratulate me, because the normal experience is C-76. This is another thing. I've finally figured out why sitting on the exit row is so noisy, and I realized through my X-ray vision glasses that I'm demoing for a high-tech vendor, I saw that there's actually an engine underneath the exit row, and that's why the noise is so loud on 737s. And the other day,
I'd be more worried about the scratches on the window there.
Yeah, well, that was a camera problem. I got stuck the other day, a couple of weeks ago, I went from Miami to New York to Indianapolis, and when we landed, we spent 4 hours, when I got diverted, the other day, we spent 4 hours on the ground attached to a jetway, but we weren't allowed to leave the plane. And now I know why, because it's a jetway to nowhere. And I don't know why they have this at this airport. It just seems like it's just another way to furiously upset travelers. Anyway, John's talking about there's been some improvements in events. I don't agree in some regards. Every single event's got to have somebody to come out, an acrobat, a gymnast, a marching band, whatever, but you got to have some kind of dancers, and they're going to come out and do some kind of stuff. I miss the old days when it was Vegas showgirls, but still, I don't know why we need to have these things, and they get more ludicrous as the time goes on. Meg Bear saw me venting about that this week, and she's the head cheese over at Success Factors. And she sounds like she may actually come out herself next year and do some dancing. And I opine that may look like Elaine Bennis's character on Seinfeld when she did her famous dance bit. Swag is definitely back. I know John cynically is probably going to say it's all the leftover swag from 2019 that didn't get distributed, but it was there. And one show, I saw that there was just swag all over the place. But what you don't see this year, interestingly enough, are flare buttons. And I've got a vest that's got 200 or 300 flare buttons from different shows on there, but I haven't picked up but a couple of buttons at all this year. I did get, like, here's one on my desk. So I am getting some pieces from time to time, but flare is just not there.
That's you, Brian. You have to go looking for this stuff.
No, I don't have to look for any of this. It just shows up,
John, we're dregs. We don't get that stuff.
Yeah. I've also noticed trend. Cornerstone years ago, I looked it up. It was like 2015. They had an event, and they had this giant sign, and I thought it was interesting because all the attendees of the show would all go stand in front, beside, or behind it to get their picture taken with this enormous sign. Dayforce had one, or Ceridian Dayforce had one this week, but we've also seen IFS had theirs with LED lights or whatever all over it, and HR Tech even had its own big giant sign that you get to stand by. I'm just waiting. John, are you going to give us a surprise announcement and tell us that Diginomica is going to have a big cutout sign like that?
Yeah, we might be waiting on that for a while, but I am looking forward to seeing all those signs set up on your ranch back home.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah. Well, when I get them all set up, we'll have, I'll invite you down for target practice, and we'll have a good time. You can read the headline here. I think some vendors, because of their contracts pre-pandemic, they booked these facilities and paid for this stuff, but the crowds really aren't that, back in full swing yet. And like here was the breakfast area for one show, and you could tell they had way more space and they had attendees, and that's something we see quite common. Press rooms, which are always the bane of my existence, they're kind of interesting, but this one really took the cake. It wasn't a room, it was in the hallway at this show, and it was just a table and some chairs, and that's it. That was it. Well, at least they had a power strip up there, so I'll give them a D minus, I guess, for this one. I'm sure Vinnie has an opinion as to why an HR show has skee ball machines in the expo hall. I have no idea what they're doing there.
And it sounds like nobody was using them.
Well, I had to time my shot perfectly to get that picture, but yeah. You're in a Vegas software event when they put signs like this in the hotel elevators, and makes you just wonder what kind of zanies are showing up at the event. And I'd like to just kind of leave you with a couple parting thoughts. One, I did a show in Singapore this year, and not long after I left the Marina Bay Sands and the show itself, I'm walking outside, and what do I run into? A 4.5 foot long monitor lizard. So I thought it was interesting because I thought this guy must have missed the sales rep meeting that they were having and just escaped from there. And that's how he got loose. But this is the kind of thing you can run into too. Oh, yeah. And I forgot. Airplane travel is so great because those great meals you get on the planes. And at one show, HR Tech, I loved this thing. Tim Hortons was doing their conference at the same time, and all the smart attendees at HR Tech were finding where the Tim Hortons people had all the best coffee and donuts, and that's where they were going. Anyway, one final point on this. I actually got an old school ID badge the other day. Somebody actually handed it to me. I didn't have to scan a QR code, type my name in, stuff, stand in a long line. No, somebody ran right up to me, go, "Here you go, Brian," and that was it. And I haven't seen one of these in years, by the way. So here's the recap. I think crowds are down, but what you have at these shows are all the serious buyers and customers. That's who's really there. A bunch of the looky-loos, they're not there right now. I also think that a lot of companies are they're so short of staff they can't really afford to let a lot of people go or let them go for the whole length of a show. So the attendance is a bit off. Partners, I found it amazing. Their partners are spending, hundreds of thousands of dollars or more on some partnership deals, and then they don't even bother to show up. You don't even see them in the expo halls or anything else. And I'm still trying to figure out how that is a great use of their marketing money, is to sponsor something but not be there. If you guys have some opinions on that, throw them out. The marketing is more serious than ever, but yet we don't see people doing any guerrilla marketing. So the funds out of some of this technology marketing. We talked already about some of the pre-pandemic contracts that these guys still have to honor. And then the implementers are also kind of scarce at these events. But the one thing that still holds true more than ever now is customers and prospects. They want access to the top executives at these companies. That's what they want out of these shows.
Okay, so I'm going to borrow a line from Robert Plant of ZEP. And because my travels have been very different than that of Brian's or John's. We have fewer physical visits, but a hell of a lot more virtual visits. Almost 750 of them across, I'd say, 35 countries, 25 different industries. So let me explain how I've done that. So I've been lucky over the last 18 months or so to write a couple of books, one for IFS, one for SAP. Let me explain what each of these books does. So Darren Roos had this pretty impressive vision on what he calls moment of service. It's about how do you orchestrate your assets, your customer service, your field service, etc., to the different points of service, so that you delight your customers at that point rather than disappointing them. Well, that leads into a technology discussion. It's a trend called servitization. A lot of product companies are moving into service-based contracts. How do you deliver that? You need digital twins, you need a different form of contract management, you need a different form of field service, and so on. So as part of that, I helped them did about 50 interviews for them. IFS executives, some of their partners, and several of their customers, very impressive customers. So I delivered to them the draft, and then they took over and, obviously molded it to their needs. And book they gave out advanced copies at their conference last month, and it should be out publicly in the next few weeks. But that was one what I call thematic trend around everything as a service, new forms of business models, everything as a service. SAP, on the other hand, was much more ambitious. Not just one theme. We looked at 8 themes. So some in energy, some in health, some in new mobility. So, the energy, for example, we're looking at the hydrogen economy. We're looking at carbon capture. We're looking at next generation nuclear. We're obviously looking at wind and solar maturing fairly rapidly. So then we get into decentralized grids. We get into EV charging stations. So a lot of that is covered in that theme. There's a health theme which looks at the globalization of healthcare. Healthcare has traditionally been a very, very regional, almost national sector, right? Because they have unique certifications, unique regulations. The peer provider frameworks tend to be very national. What we're starting to see the early trends in looking at global healthcare to see what we can learn from each other. So as part of that, I interviewed a customer in South Africa, a customer in Singapore, somebody in Australia, and so on. The mobility trend looks at next generation automotive and transportation in general. So the auto industry is moving from a hardware-centric culture to a software-defined future. So they're connected. There's an acronym called CASE: connected, autonomous, shared, and electrified. And that is just having massive ramifications on networks, the availability of infrastructure to charge electric cars, et cetera, et cetera. So in each one of these themes, we looked at some very, very mega trends that are affecting multiple industries. So as part of that, between IFS and SAP, probably had 200 conversations with customers, partners, and with the executives. Next, I've been running for a couple of years now, Analyst Cam, Burning Platform, and New Normal video interviews. And, that is, it's just, when I started off, I thought I'd be doing about 40 or 50, and the interest in video interviews would kind of die down. I'm up to 500. Obviously, a lot of vendors present in the Analyst Cam. It's a different form of an event, if you will, because they get to present to me a lot more detail in products, a lot more personalized presentations. So between the books and these video episodes, 700 different conversations. So I've been, somewhat spoiled without having to travel much. I've gotten a lot of information on how the industry is evolving, how customers are innovating, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that doesn't mean I haven't traveled. I've been selected, but I have traveled quite a bit this year. And, most of them, Salesforce, Dreamforce, Zoho's Analyst Summit, SAP Sapphire, one for my university. I'm on my business school's advisory board, and they're about to celebrate their 150th anniversary, that university is. So they had a event at the New York Stock Exchange kind of honored them, and I was invited to that. Great forum for an event. Unit 4 had one in Boston. Workday had one in Orlando, and IFS had one in Miami Beach recently. So, what's been particularly nice is smaller secondary cities. So Zoho one was in the Zoho Alice Summit was in Austin. IFS was in Miami Beach. It's good to not have to keep going back to Vegas or Orlando that often. So I have been to several events, but I've been very selective about the ones that I've been to. Between these travels and my advisory work, I still qualified for Southwest highest tiers. So I get treated a little bit better than Brian does. And Margaret can fly for free. You know, there's some perks that I enjoy by being loyal to Southwest. The positive thing is, on average, I stayed at events a day longer than I have in the past. I really enjoyed evening events. I enjoyed a lot more meetings and so on. So that's a positive. Let me drill into that a little bit more. Well, there's a US politician who recently lost. And when he was asked about inflation, he kind of used the let them eat cake kind of comment. In his case, he said, my family used to switch to Chef Boyardee when things got tough. Well, let me tell you that the food at the events was much better than this. But it was kind of humorous to listen to him say that. Let me give you some feedback on the events. I mean, I found most of them really, really genuine by saying it's nice to have customers back in person, it's nice to have analysts back in person, and so on. So that was very positive. Like I said, nice to see vendors try out new locations, Austin, Miami Beach, etc. Hope that continues. Maybe Nashville, maybe, other secondary cities would be nice to see. The expo halls have become much more diverse, not just systems integrators. I saw robotics at Sapphire, I saw digital agencies, strategy firms. So they're expanding and they're starting to show up at events, which is very positive. A lot more startups at these events. Workday Ventures had several of them. SAP IO Foundries had several at Sapphire. App Exchange Salesforce has, obviously had them at Dreamforce for a while. But it's good to see a variety of partners and investments start to show up. I thought the amount of effort that event managers put into the conferences this year was really phenomenal. I mean, the number of activities that Sandy Lowe at Zoho planned for the Analyst Day, or what Oliver's team at IFS organized for IFS Unleashed was mind-boggling. I mean, I can't believe they managed to fit so much in. Another thing I've enjoyed is some of these vendors are inviting, vertical media. So at the IFS event, I met an aerospace journalist, I met a energy analyst, and so on. So beyond IT, it's nice to see a wider set of influencers. I know John says he likes to go over to these events for customer meetings. For some reason, I prefer the customer sessions after I meet them and in the analyst cam format. At the event, for whatever reason, I have not had very good luck getting decent content out of customer or indeed partner meetings. So, I probably will continue with that process of saying hello, getting to at least meet, shake hands, and then do a later interview. I still believe that analyst summits are my preferred format. User conferences are really for customers. I always feel like I'm intruding on their time, taking up time with executives and so on. But we'll discuss that in a little bit more with, I think Brian would probably say user conference. Oh, John would definitely say user conferences are his preferred format. All right, well, we heard from Brian, but all his travel tribulations, I would say mine is not quite as negative. Well, you can be the judge. Let me go through it a little more in detail. The most positive thing about travel is airports. Several of them have spanking new or refurbished terminals. So LaGuardia has a new terminal. San Francisco has one that opened about 3 or 4 years ago. Fort Lauderdale has been refurbished. So that's the most pleasant part of travel. They're overcrowded, but at least you're walking through reasonably new infrastructure, reasonably clean facilities. The air experience, I found, business travel is still struggling to get up to pre-pandemic levels. But what's taken that place is more family travel. So I call it amateur travel. I mean, I don't want to be too negative about that, but a lot of kids, a lot of non-business travelers, that certainly you got to adjust to that experience. And unfortunately, quite a bit of delays in the air. So that's been negative. Hotels, compared to 21, have significantly improved, but still a lot of annoying experiences. So at Workday Rising at the Hyatt there, I got a room with a shower curtain missing. So I took a shower the first morning and struggled in the corner, and I took a shower. Fortunately, they replaced it the next day, but they should never have given me a room with a shower curtain missing. A Marriott in one of the events, bill was not available for a week. I had to repeatedly call them and say, guys, can I get my bill? So, I mean, it's improving, but it's still a little inconsistent. Rental cars have been horrible experiences. They were bad in 21 and they continued in 22. It could be an Avis specific issue, but in a recent rental, I mean, they didn't have a car for an hour and a half. And when I got it, but that was not available, they gave me a downgraded version, which they hadn't really cleaned. So it smelled of weed. And the next morning, oil change required, tire pressure, warnings came on and so on. So not a very positive experience. I thought Uber and taxis have improved quite a bit compared to 21, but they've become more expensive. There's a lot more surge pricing, it seems like, in both. Well, not in taxis, but Uber certainly. So that needs to stabilize a little bit more. I would say probably the most disappointing thing is in the dining area. If you were to go out of your event location or hotel, a lot of the urban settings, you got to check if the locations are even safe to travel to, especially in cities like San Francisco and New York. And prices definitely up substantially. So overall, what I'd say is I'm glad I've traveled less than either John or Brian. I don't know if I could have handled 30 to 35 trips this year. The 8 to 10 I've done are just enough. So broader vendor feedback. Brian is going to talk about what he expects out of keynotes and so on. To me, it's not so much the format, it's the content. I want to see what vendors have done in their product, in their positioning, and so on. The last 3 years, we've seen massive shocks. Obviously, COVID, more recently, the Ukraine and impact on energy strategies and so on. Obviously, climate change keeps becoming more urgent. And then every one of their customers has gone through not just little D's, big digital transformations. And yet I see a lot of business as usual product presentations. So, what I would say is not just an event rethinking, you need to rethink your addressable markets. The 2 books I've written clearly have introduced me to new processes, certainly way beyond IT. There's new energies, there's new medicine, there's new mobility, et cetera, et cetera. So rethink your addressable markets. I mentioned the ecosystems have been growing. Keep expanding them. A lot of people still showcase systems integrators a little too much. You need to adopt more attractive business models. Your customers are under a lot of pressure to change their own business models, and you need to do the same. Zoho One recently completed 5 years. I mean, that's an example of one that has, an innovative business model that has been introduced. We need to see a lot more. Revisit the definition of influencers. I said I enjoyed having the opportunity to meet influencers from different verticals. I'd like other vendors could do similar. And in general, it still is a very outbound based communication, and it's a little bit out of whack. Vendors are still not asking analysts for input. It's a lot more, here's what I want to say and just run with it. Okay. What I'd like to say is, the new decade got delayed. Last 2 years have been kind of a wash, but starting in 23, hopefully we'll get a lot more novelty in business. Well, new business, right? New forms of business. So it's important that vendors start afresh. So you've had a chance to listen to 3 of us. We have very different business models, very different content formats, and yet all 3 of us have been extremely productive in the middle of the pandemic. We've all got very different definitions of hybrid. Obviously, I've become more comfortable with the virtual format, much more so than John and Brian. But I keep traveling quite a bit, and I hope next year, we'll start to travel even more. So, but I'd like you to rethink your product, your communication strategy, your sphere of influence, et cetera, et cetera. So basically, it's going to be a new world. So rethink everything. Okay. Looking forward to it.
Cool.
Thanks so much, guys.
Thanks, Vinnie. Thanks,
See ya.
Brian.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Indeed.
Back at you, everybody on that. And anyway, safe travels, everybody.
Enjoyed it, peeps. Catch you later.